For the year 2020, I'm making a video review for every new movie I watch, whether in theaters or at home, and on May 18th, I watched Rocketman. Welcome to my year in movies. This is Talking to Myself. So, Rocketman, directed by Dexter Fletcher, is a musical biopic about the life and times of rock musician Elton John. The film is told through John's perspective through the framing device of a support group meeting as he recounts his triumphs and tragedies. While Rocketman is a musical biopic, it takes some creative choices when discussing its subject. I've recorded this review like 3 times at this point because trying to talk about it has proven to be impossible. I don't know what it is about it. So, let's talk about Rocketman, while also talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, because Bohemian Rhapsody stole all of Rocketman's thunder, and there are a lot of similarities, some eerie similarities, in fact. So the director of Rocketman, Dexter Fletcher, directed the last 16 days of Bohemian Rhapsody, and he also handled post-production. Miraculously, Bohemian Rhapsody survived the first half of its production without any director at all. A mystery. Who threw all of those things at Rami Malek? We'll never know. So Bohemian Rhapsody came out in November, which was like peak Oscar season, and everyone went nuts for Bohemian Rhapsody. It got so many Oscar nominations, it pulled in so many awards. Rocketman came out in May and got nothing. I believe it did get a nomination for Best Original Song and did win that one, but I don't think it got much else. In fact, on IMDb, Bohemian Rhapsody is rated higher than Rocketman, which I think is very unfair, as I thought Rocketman was an infinitely better movie. So let's talk about why. Bohemian Rhapsody came out in November, as mentioned, and as a result, everyone latched onto it, and that was the one that we talked about for a number of reasons. There's a really good video essay from Patrick Willems about the stale formula of musical biopics, and Bohemian Rhapsody kind of was the impetus for that, and it seems like Bohemian Rhapsody was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to musical biopics, because it was so paint by numbers. You watch it, you fill in Queen's music where appropriate, make sure the runtime hits 2 hours, and you're good. Rocketman, granted, is still 2 hours long, is still kind of a musical biopic, but it takes the formula and bends it. Doesn't break it, but it bends it. And real choices were made in telling Elton John's life, even with John having such a very prominent part in how his story would be told. For a lot of these movies, the band itself does have a pretty heavy hand in producing the film. It tends to boost their sales. In the case of Motley Crue, it actually got them to, blow up their We'll Never Tour Again agreement, though it's not like they're gonna tour anyway. And so it makes sense that they want the movie to paint them in kind of a flattering light. And so in the case of Bohemian Rhapsody, I don't know much about the band's personal lives, but it sounds like Brian May and Roger Taylor's involvement pushed any problem that May, Taylor, or John Deacon could have had. Any problematic aspect of their character was, kind of shuffled onto Freddie Mercury. And so Freddie Mercury was kind of the lightning rod for, being late to rehearsal, being, a philanderer, doing all the drugs. It's like, I don't care if a band has the responsible member. They all probably got into stuff. It's just how it is. But it sounds like Elton John's involvement in his film was more like, please, make me look worse. And that paid off in a big way. And by having Rocketman, that whole story be told through John's perspective, we're not going to say he's an unreliable narrator, but we see how his perspective on things colors how certain characters are portrayed. I'm going to call them characters, even though they're based on real life people. In the case of Bohemian Rhapsody, Brian, Roger, and John come off looking pretty clean, even though Freddie's kind of painted is more like the bad boy of Queen. In Rocketman, for the most part, it does okay. Bernie Taupin kind of comes off in a more positive light, but for any negativity that certain figures could have, Elton's painted with as much negativity for his drug use, for, spending habits, for, sex addiction, and just things like that. And that helps, in some ways it helps make the whole film as a whole feel accurate because Elton's admitting his own shortcomings. His first lines in the film talk about how he's a sex addict, a shopping addict, an alcoholic, and a drug addict. Like that's our introduction to him. He emerges into this support group meeting dressed as the devil, and it's kind of a really cool framing device of him gradually taking off all of the performative junk and coming to terms with who he is and why he is the way he is. And that's another thing that really works in Rocketman's favor, that kind of bends the formula. With the more strict biopics, they're more about just telling a very flat story. They're, showing the artist's rise to fame, and they follow the same steps of like obscurity, fame, upward trajectory, drug fallout, recovery, back to success. With Rocketman, we enter at, you know, the between drug fallout and recovery and continued success phase. And we do hit all of those beats, but the upward trajectory and drug abuse are played together. And so we see Elton get discharged from the hospital, shoved into a costume by a bunch of other people, and he has to plaster a smile on his face to greet his adoring public. And I tend to think that's how it actually looks, you know? Additionally, and probably the thing that I appreciated most about the deviation from the typical formula is the fact that the music is integrated into the story. In Rocketman, the music serves as a narrative device, so it's not just Elton John singing his songs. Sometimes you'll have, you know, Bernie Taupin, he'll sing. Elton's parents and his grandmother, they will sing a song with him. The music is integrated with Elton's life. We see how everything kind of plays into his music. You see everything contributing to his art. And so the music isn't just a checklist of their greatest hits that we have to make sure we hit before the 2-hour runtime elapses. And that makes Rocketman as a whole feel almost like the film adaptation of the stage musical. And the fact that Rocketman feels more like a musical in the more traditional sense than just a musical biopic, that helps and hurts it overall. It helps it because, again, we see how the music is important to the subject's life. So even when music makes an appearance that hasn't been written for, 10, 15, 20 years, we still see how that music was always kind of there in a way. Another detail I love, so there's always like the touring montage where they play bigger and brighter venues and they play like one song in the background while all of that happens. We kind of get that, but again, it happens during the drug meltdown. So he's playing Pinball Wizard as he's tripping balls, and the whole stadium is just like spinning around him, and the like colors are flying, and he's like panicking as he's playing this music. And it makes it so much more impactful when he wakes up like a couple days later and he's not sure what's happened. And it just, that helps convey how crippling his drug issues were. As I mentioned, it kind of feels like a musical, which works in its favor and doesn't work. And this kind of gets into where it doesn't work. Yes, it's being told through Elton's perspective, and so we can kind of chalk up any inaccuracies to just like, oh, he's misremembering it, or, he's painting it through his own perspective. I don't know much about his life. I did like cursory reading after I watched the film. I don't know if his manager / boyfriend John Reed or his parents were that monstrous in real life. I get the vibe that his mother was just horrific, and she was very coarse and callous with him and was just very withholding of love. But some of the execution of that portrayal, especially of his mother, and kind of John Reed too, is just a little flat and cartoonish. I won't dispute the facts because I don't know them, but I will dispute kind of the presentation of those facts. Thankfully, because of Taran's performance, the emotion that we're supposed to feel from those lines still comes through, but the lines themselves just feel very like hand-wringy, mustache twirling bad guy. And that may just be because I can't wrap my head around the fact that like there are parents like that actually out there who will say these things to their children. And again, because of Taran's performance, we feel that, but his mother as a whole didn't feel like a fully rounded character. And that's totally fine, because if I were watching this as a musical villains can kind of be underdeveloped, because sitting in a theater, watching it all happening live in front of you, your emotions are heightened because it's all happening in front of you, live, fresh, and those human emotions don't have the veneer of separation that film provides. So I was willing to be like, I'd go for this. If I were watching it live as a musical, I would go for this. It was momentarily distracting. But as a whole, it worked out really well. So we'll say this other, I don't know how many points we are at this point, but I think the strongest thing that this does in bending the biopic formula is it doesn't take the expository essay route, it takes the thematic essay route. And the strongest and best biopics that I think have ever been made focus on specific eras in an artist's life. The biopics that tend to try and fit an entire artist's career and life into a single movie, it just doesn't work because that's so much you have to cram in there, and it has to fit this formula, otherwise you can't do it. With Rocketman, they chose kind of two themes to build the story around. And the first theme was Elton's quest to find unconditional love and how his drug habit was fueled by his fear of living without that unconditional love. Because, his parents were very cold and distant. They weren't supportive. He seems to be kind of happiest when he's with Bernie, his best friend, but there's still kind of that gap missing. And even when he starts, sleeping with John, that relationship very quickly gets into abuse. But the whole framing of the support network is Elton unpacking all of this. And so the most powerful moment in the movie ends up being Elton stripped of all of his costumes, wearing very simple clothes, wearing his regular glasses again. He confronts the idea that, his parents weren't going to love him or accept him. He accepts, the fact that it was wrong for John to treat him the way that he did. And he accepts that he was wrong in the way that he lashed out at Bernie and shut him out when he probably needed him most. And Elton is then confronted by his younger self when he was still Reginald. And having processed all of his depression and grief and addiction, he gives his younger self a hug. And that makes, the song that actually won the Oscar this year, it makes it a way cooler song. Because, when I initially heard it, I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's a cool song. But seeing it as the culmination of all of these years that Elton has dealt with, rejection, addiction, and now almost 30 years of sobriety, it's a way cooler song, and it's so neat. And so then the film ends with a recreation of the music video for I'm Still Standing, and it's really neat. It helps make that a climactic moment, and then the song itself is great, because that's another song that Elton wrote with Bernie Taupin, and so it's like, all of this, it built, it had a theme, it had a consensus, a thesis it was trying to convey, and that makes it a much stronger film overall. Because the film takes a thematic approach, the biopic as a whole feels cohesive. We didn't cover everything, but we covered what counted in order to convey the theme of the movie, which is learning to love yourself. I was way in favor of that. And so yeah, with films like Bohemian Rhapsody, it's just like we're just gonna tell a narrative about Queen, and there's nothing more there. I do want to say that it's also worth mentioning that Bohemian Rhapsody was able to show in China. They cut maybe 2 minutes, and if memory serves, the ending of Bohemian Rhapsody says Freddie and Jim Hutton were close. So it's like, aw, look at those best friends just hanging out. And Rocketman does still do kind of the freeze frame and where are they now segment that a lot of biopics do. That's kind of annoying, but whatever. Rocketman was banned in several countries because of the gay themes that were in it and the gay scenes that were in it as well. Gosh, Bohemian Rhapsody really stole the thunder for Rocketman, because by the time Rocketman came out, I think people were just like, we're not doing this anymore. I think this movie is a lot of fun. I've always been really happy by the connection that Taron Egerton and Elton John have kind of had. They've had this weird weaving in and out of each other's lives that's really neat. Taron sang Your Song for his drama school audition. He sang I'm Still Standing for the movie Sing. Elton made an appearance in Kingsman 2, and now Taron's getting to play him in the movie, and that's really neat. I like that. It's a really simple thing, but it's really cool to me. So yeah, if you've seen Bohemian Rhapsody but have not seen Rocketman, check out Rocketman. It's a way better movie. And I enjoyed Bohemian Rhapsody. It was a lot of fun. Of course, I love Queen's music. I love Elton John's music. But I think Rocketman's a better movie overall, so I highly recommend it. Also, they played Don't Go Breaking My Heart in the credits. That's the third movie I've seen where they use that song in the credits. Why? This has been my Year in Movies. Thank you for watching.